Have you ever looked into the eyes of a venomous snake and thought it was the only family you had left? I have. 20 years ago, a woman whispered to me, "Do not let him sign the birth certificate." I laughed. But now, with a pen hovering over property papers, I understand. That signature was not an admission of fatherhood but a slow death sentence. If you think you know who is sleeping next to your daughter, listen closely. This story might just save your life. My name is James Miller. I am 68 years old, and for the last 40 years, my world has been measured in millimeters and seconds. My shop, Kronos Restoration, sits on a corner of a cobblestone street in one of the older, forgotten districts of Chicago. It is a place where time slows down quite literally. While the world outside rushes by in a blur of smartphones and stock market tickers inside these walls, life moves at the rhythm of a pendulum, swinging back and forth. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The shop smells of old brass cedarwood and the faint chemical tang of synthetic oil. It is a scent that comforts me more than any expensive cologne ever could. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the rain was hammering against the plate glass window, blurring the gray city outside into a watercolor painting of gloom. But I barely noticed the weather. My attention was entirely focused on the object clamped in the vise before me. I adjusted the loupe over my right eye, screwing up my face slightly to hold it in place. Through the magnifying lens, the mechanism looked like a city made of gold and ruby. It was a tourbillon cage, one of the most complex complications in horology, designed to counter the effects of gravity on the escapement. My hands, despite my age, were steady as rock. They had to be. A tremor of even a fraction of a millimeter could snap a pivot or scratch a bridge, ruining a piece of history worth more than most people earned in a year. I picked up my tweezers. The tips filed to needle points and gently nudged the hairspring. It breathed. That is the only way to describe it. The balance wheel began to oscillate, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat that sent a vibration up the tweezers and into my fingertips. "Beautiful," I whispered to no one. There was no one to hear me, of course. My wife Martha had passed away a decade ago, and Emily, my sweet Emily. It had been 5 years since the cancer took her. 5 years since the light went out of my life, leaving me with nothing but an empty house and a grandson Leo, whom I barely saw anymore. And then there was David, my son-in-law, the man who had inherited my daughter's love but not her heart. I pushed the thought of David away. It required too much energy to be angry, and right now, the tourbillon needed my patience. The bell above the door chimed a sharp, brassy sound that cut through the silence. I did not look up immediately. I was in the middle of seating a jewel. "Excuse me," a voice said. It was impatient. Rich. "How much longer is this going to take? I have a board meeting at 4. I sighed, placing the tweezers down on the green felt mat. I removed my loupe and turned on my stool. The man standing at the counter was Mr. Sterling. He was a regular, though not the kind I enjoyed. He collected watches not because he loved them, but because they were assets. He was currently wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and he was tapping a manicured finger on the glass display case. "Precision cannot be rushed, Mr. Sterling," I said calmly. "Your Vacheron Constantin needed a complete overhaul. The lubricants had dried out completely. If I had wound it, the friction would have destroyed the mainspring." "Fine, fine," he waved a hand dismissively. "Just get it done. Time is money, James." "Time is life, Mr. Sterling," I corrected him gently. "Money is just what we use to pass the time." He rolled his eyes, checking his phone. The rain intensified, lashing against the windows with a sudden violence. The door opened again, bringing with it a gust of cold, wet wind that made the papers on my desk flutter. Mr. Sterling recoiled, stepping back as if he might catch a disease. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was soaked to the bone. Her gray hair was plastered to her skull, and her coat was a patchwork of rags held together by safety pins and dirt. She wore men's boots that were 2 sizes too large, the leather cracked and peeling. She was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered audibly. "Please," she rasped. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping over concrete. Just a moment out of the rain, please." Mr. Sterling pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and covered his nose. "Good Lord," he muttered. "James, get her out of here. She smells like a sewer." I looked at the woman. I saw the dirt, yes. I saw the poverty. But I also saw her eyes. They were sharp, alert, and filled with a desperate exhaustion that I recognized. It was the look of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for a very long time. "I am running a business here," Mr. Sterling snapped. "I don't pay premium prices to inhale the stench of the street." I stood up slowly, my knees popping. I walked around the counter, ignoring Mr. Sterling completely. I approached the woman. She flinched as I got close, raising a hand, as if she expected to be struck. "It is all right," I said softly. "Come in. Close the door. You are letting the heat out." She stared at me, stunned. "Sir, come," I said, gesturing to the small electric heater I kept near the customer waiting area. "Sit here. Warm yourself." "James," Mr. Sterling exclaimed. "This is absurd. If she stays, I am taking my business elsewhere." I turned to him. "Mr. Sterling, your watch is currently disassembled in 47 pieces on my bench. You are welcome to take them elsewhere, but I doubt you will find anyone who can put them back together without a schematic. I suggest you wait quietly, or come back tomorrow." His face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his tie. He huffed, grabbed a magazine, and marched to the far corner of the room, turning his back on us. I went to the back room and brewed a cup of tea. Earl Grey. It was all I had. I brought it out to the woman. She was sitting on the edge of the velvet chair, trying not to let her dirty coat touch the fabric. She took the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "My name is Eleanor." "James," I replied. "Drink. It will help." She took a sip, closing her eyes as the warmth hit her. After a moment, she reached into the deep pocket of her coat. I do not have money," she said, her voice shaking. "But I have this. It stopped working yesterday. It is the only thing I have left." She pulled out a lump of metal. At first glance, it looked like junk. A pocket watch, the silver case tarnished so badly, it looked black. The crystal was cracked and the crown was missing. "I know it looks bad," she said, seeing my expression. "But it was my father's. Can you make it tick again? I just need to hear it tick. It keeps me company." I took the watch from her. It was heavy, heavier than a cheap replica. I pulled my loop from my pocket and inspected the case. Beneath the grime, I saw hallmarks, sterling silver. I used my thumbnail to pop the back case open. My breath caught in my throat. The exterior was a disaster, but the interior was a cathedral. It was a movement from the 1920s, a Patek Philippe. I recognized the bridge layout immediately. It was a gondola movement, hand-finished with Geneva stripes that caught the light even in the dim room. The balance wheel was bimetallic split for temperature compensation. The jewels were set in gold chaitons. This was not just a watch. This was a masterpiece. In its current condition, the movement alone was worth tens of thousands of dollars. Restored. It was priceless. I looked up at Eleanor. She was watching me anxiously, blowing on her tea. Did she know? Did she have any idea she was carrying a fortune in her pocket? "Can it be fixed?" she asked. "It is broken," I lied gently. I did not want to scare her, nor did I want Mr. Sterling to overhear. "The mainspring is snapped, and it needs oil." "Oh," her face fell. "I cannot pay." "I did not ask for payment," I said. I stood up and walked to my bench. "Sit. Drink your tea. This will take 20 minutes." I sat down and went to work. I did not just oil it. I replaced the mainspring with a new old stock alloy, spring I had been saving for a rainy day. Literally. I cleaned the escapement. I regulated the timing. I polished the interior of the case just enough to remove the corrosion that threatened the metal, but left the exterior patina so no one would target her for it. I was just closing the case back when the door opened again. This time, the wind did not blow in. The man who entered sucked the air out of the room. It was David. My son-in-law wore a suit that was tailored to the millimeter. He was 45 but tried to look 30. His hair was slicked back and his teeth were whitened to an unnatural brightness. He drove a brand new Porsche that was currently idling in the handicap spot outside. "James," he boomed. He always shouted. He thought volume equaled authority. "I've been calling you all morning. Why don't you answer your damn phone?" He strode into the shop, bringing with him the smell of aggressive musk and entitlement. Mr. Sterling looked up, recognizing a fellow predator, and nodded. David ignored him. Then, David saw Eleanor. He stopped dead, his nose wrinkled. "What is this, James? Are you running a shelter now?" "She is a customer, David," I said, keeping my voice low. I walked back to Eleanor and handed her the watch. "Here, it is fixed. Wind it gently every morning." Eleanor took the watch, her eyes wide. She held it to her ear. Tick, tick, tick. A smile broke across her face, transforming her. For a second, she didn't look homeless. She looked dignified. "Thank you," she mouthed. "Get her out," David snapped. He walked over and kicked the leg of the chair Eleanor was sitting on. "Hey, you. Party's over. Get out. You're dirtying the furniture." "David," I barked. "That is enough." "No, it's not enough, James." David turned on me, his eyes cold and hard. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're losing it. You're letting homeless junkies into the shop. You're probably fixing their stolen goods for free. You're running this business into the ground." Eleanor stood up quickly. She clutched the watch to her chest. "I am leaving," she said softly. "I do not want trouble." "Yeah, you'd better leave," David sneered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a blue folder. He tossed it onto my workbench right on top of the delicate tourbillon parts I had been working on earlier. Metal clashed against metal. "Careful!" I shouted, rushing to check the components. "Stop tinkering with the toys, Dad," David said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "It's time." I talked to the partners. Apex Horizon is ready to move forward with the acquisition of the block. We need this building. And frankly, you need the rest. "I do not want to rest," I said, my hands trembling with rage as I moved the folder off my tools. "It's not about what you want anymore," David leaned in, his face close to mine. "It's about what's best for the family, for Leo. You want Leo to have a future, don't you? Sign the papers, sell the shop, go to the retirement community in Florida. I've already paid the deposit." "I am not going to Florida," I said through gritted teeth. "Read the papers, James," David said, tapping the folder. "Just read them. And wash your hands. You smell like a mechanic." He straightened his jacket, shot a look of disgust at Eleanor, who was making her way to the door, and checked his reflection in the glass cabinet. "I'll pick the papers up on Friday," David said. "Don't make this hard, James. You're 68. Stop pretending you have a future here." He turned and walked out. The bell chimed. The Porsche engine revved and he was gone. The silence returned to the shop, but it was shattered now. The peace was gone. Mr. Sterling stood up, placed a $50 bill on the counter, far less than the service was worth, and left without a word, likely wanting to distance himself from the drama. I was alone. Or so I thought. The door was still closing. Eleanor was standing on the threshold. She hadn't left yet. She had watched the whole exchange. She looked at David's retreating car. Then she turned her head and looked at me. The shivering was gone. The fear was gone. Her posture straightened. She looked at me with eyes that were clear, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent. It was not the look of a woman who slept on park benches. It was the look of a hawk spotting a mouse in the grass. She nodded to me once, a slow, deliberate gesture of respect. "Thank you for the time, James," she said. Her voice was stronger now. not raspy. Then she stepped out into the rain and vanished into the gray afternoon, leaving me alone with the ticking clocks and the blue folder that felt radioactive on my desk. I looked down at my hands. They were stained with oil. David called them the hands of a mechanic. I picked up the loop and put it back to my eye. He was wrong. These were the hands of a man who fixed things. And as I looked at the folder, I realized that for the first time in 5 years, I had something bigger than a watch to fix. The blue folder sat on my workbench like a lead weight, disrupting the delicate ecosystem of my shop. I had spent the entire night reading it, my eyes straining under the glow of the desk lamp until the sun began to bleed through the blinds. The document was titled Apex Horizon Urban Revitalization Project. It was a glossy, high-production brochure filled with buzzwords like synergy, vertical integration, and luxury living. But to me, it read like an obituary. My son-in-law David did not just want the shop. He wanted the entire block. He was the CEO of this Apex Horizon, a company that seemed to exist primarily on paper and in the fevered dreams of venture capitalists. The plan was to demolish Kronos Restoration, along with the bakery next door and the old bookshop on the corner, to erect a 50-story glass monstrosity. He wanted to erase a century of history, to build condos that no one in this neighborhood could afford. The bell above the door chimed. It was barely 9 in the morning. David walked in. He looked fresh, rested, and smelled of expensive espresso and ambition. He did not wait for an invitation. He pulled up the customer stool, spun it around, and sat down, leaning his elbows on the counter, as if we were old friends discussing the weather. "So, James," he said, flashing that white predatory smile. "Did you read it? It is a generous offer. $3 million. That is more money than you have seen in your entire life. You could buy a condo in Boca Raton, play golf, die warm." I looked at him over the rim of my reading glasses. The anger I felt was cold, settled deep in my stomach like a stone. "I am not selling David," I said, my voice steady. "This shop is not just a building. It is a legacy. I built this business from nothing. Your wife grew up in the back room while I worked at this bench. And when I am gone, this belongs to Leo." David laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "Leo," he asked, shaking his head. "You think Leo wants to sit in this dusty tomb, hunched over gears the size of a grain of sand until his eyes fail and his back gives out? James, wake up. The kid is 18. He wants a life. He loves this shop," I countered. "He has the hands for it. He has the patience. He has expensive taste," David corrected me. "He came to me last week. He got into the London School of Economics. Do you know how much the tuition is? Plus living expenses. We are talking $300,000 over 4 years. I froze. London Business School. Leo wanted to be an artist. Since he was 5 years old, the boy had carried a sketchbook everywhere. He drew charcoal portraits that captured the soul of a subject better than a camera. Last month he had told me he was applying to the Art Institute of Chicago. He never mentioned business school to me," I said quietly. "That is because he did not want to disappoint you," David said smoothly. "He knows you are obsessed with this place. But he needs the money, James. Apex Horizon is his ticket out. If you sell, you are not just retiring. You are funding his future. Don't be selfish." I looked at him. Really looked at him. There was a glint in his eyes that I recognized. It was the same look a watch dealer gives when he is trying to sell you a Frankenstein watch, a timepiece cobbled together from mismatched parts, polished to look authentic, but rotting on the inside. "I do not believe you," I said. David's smile vanished. The mask slipped, revealing the steel beneath. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. The casual demeanor was gone. "Fine," he said. His voice dropped an octave. "Let us do this the hard way. You are 68 years old, James. You live alone. You talk to inanimate objects. Yesterday, you let a homeless woman sit in here and pretended to fix a piece of junk for her." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of mint and rot. I have spoken to a few doctors, he whispered. Geriatric specialists. It would not be hard to make a case that you are slipping. Senile dementia. Incompetence. If I petition the court for guardianship, I will get control of your assets anyway. It will just take longer, and it will be much more humiliating for you. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the threat, the naked blade. You would declare me insane, I asked. To steal my shop, I would do what is necessary to protect the family assets, David said. He checked his Rolex. A modern Daytona. Flashy. Obvious. He turned to the door, then paused. Friday night, he said. The Grand Millennium Hotel. 7 o'clock. It is the 10th anniversary of Apex Horizon. I want you there. I want you to sign the transfer deed in front of the board. It will show family unity. It will boost investor confidence. He opened the door. The street noise flooded in. If you are not there, James, or if you refuse to sign, well, I will have the competency hearing, scheduled for Monday morning. Think about it. Do it for Emily. She would not want her father to die in a state institution. The door slammed shut. I sat there for a long time. The silence of the shop, usually my sanctuary, felt oppressive. I looked at the tourbillon I had been working on yesterday. The balance wheel swung back and forth, indifferent to my turmoil. Emily, my beautiful, brilliant Emily. How had she fallen for him? I remembered the day she brought him home. She was 24, glowing, full of life. David was charming then. He listened. He brought flowers. He acted like a man who was building a world worthy of her. I had had my doubts. Something about his handshake felt too practiced, his laugh too timed, but I buried them. I wanted her to be happy, and she was for a while, until the isolation started, until the light in her eyes began to dim, replaced by a nervous anxiety whenever he walked into the room. She defended him to the end, even on her deathbed. He loves me, Dad. He just has a lot of pressure. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette in the back. I needed tea. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a rage so potent it felt like poison. I was not senile. I was not incompetent. I was a master horologist. I understood how things worked. I understood cause and effect. Night fell. I locked the shop door and pulled down the shades. I did not go upstairs to my apartment. I stayed at my workbench. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old photo album. The leather cover was cracked. I opened it to the page I knew by heart. It was Emily's wedding day. She looked radiant in white lace, her smile genuine and bright. David stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her waist. He looked triumphant. Not happy. Triumphant. Like a man who had just closed a merger. I took my loupe, a 10 times magnification Zeiss lens, and placed it over my eye. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from the photograph. The image was high resolution, taken by a professional photographer I had paid $4,000 for. I focused on David's wrist. In the photo, he was wearing a gold dress watch. He had bragged about it all night at the reception. Solid 18-karat gold, he had told my cousins. A family heirloom from the Vanderbilts. I bought it at auction. I adjusted the focus. The watch in the photo caught the light of the camera flash. I scrutinized the lugs, the metal arms that hold the strap. There, on the inner edge of the lower right lug, there was a tiny, almost invisible discoloration. A spot where the light hit differently. It was a shade of dull gray peeking through the gold. Wear through. Solid gold does not wear through. If you scratch solid gold, you just find more gold underneath. It is soft, dense, and honest. But gold plating. Gold plating is a lie. It is a microscopic layer of beauty, electroplated, over base metal, usually brass or steel. Over time, the friction of a shirt cuff, the sweat of a wrist wears it down. The truth bleeds through. I moved the loop to the dial of the watch in the photo, the indices, the spacing of the letters. It was subtle, but to an eye that had spent 40 years staring at perfection, it was screaming. The font on the date wheel was slightly too thick. The seconds hand was a fraction of a millimeter too short. It was a fake, a replica. On his wedding day, the most important day of his life, David had worn a counterfeit watch and passed it off as a priceless heirloom. I sat back, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was a metaphor for the man himself. David was gold-plated. He was shiny, attractive, and seemingly valuable on the surface. But underneath there was no substance, no density, just cheap common brass that would turn your skin green if you held onto it too long. If he lied about the watch, he lied about everything. He lied about the Vanderbilt heirloom. He likely lied about the London School of Economics. He was definitely lying about Apex Horizon's stability. A man who wears a fake watch to his own wedding is a man who builds his life on the perception of wealth, not the reality of it. Real wealth whispers, David shouted. I looked at the blue folder again. Apex Horizon. Why was he so desperate for me to sign now? Why the rush? Why the 3-day deadline? If the company was doing so well, if the project was a sure thing, he could wait. He could charm me. Desperation. He was not buying my land to build a future. He was buying it to plug a hole. I closed the photo album. The fear of the competency hearing was still there, lurking in the corners of my mind. But something else had joined it. Curiosity and resolve. I was a watchmaker. When a movement stops working, you do not just throw it away. You open it up. You dismantle it piece by piece until you find the broken gear, the dried oil, the foreign particle that is jamming the mechanism. David was a broken mechanism. And I was going to take him apart. I picked up the phone. I needed to talk to Leo. Not on the phone where David might be listening, but in person. And then, I needed to find out exactly what was ticking beneath the golden surface of Apex Horizon. You want me at the party, David, I whispered to the empty shop. I will be there. But I would not be bringing a pen. I would be bringing my loupe. Because it was time to see what you really were. I fell asleep right there at the workbench. It was not a peaceful drift into unconsciousness, but a sudden collapse of the senses, as if someone had pulled the mainspring of my body too tight, and it had finally snapped. The smell of oil and old wood faded, replaced by the cloying scent of white lilies and expensive champagne. The darkness of the shop dissolved into a blinding artificial light. I was dreaming. I was back in the year 2008. It was late spring. The air was thick with pollen and the promise of new life. We were at the house David and Emily had just bought, a sprawling McMansion in the suburbs that looked like every other house on the street, only bigger. It was the day of the baby shower. In the dream, everything was hyper-real, yet distorted by the lens of memory. The guests were a sea of pastel colors and forced smiles. They were David's friends mostly. Men in polo shirts who talked about golf handicaps and stock options, and women who looked at my worn corduroy jacket with polite confusion. I stood near the buffet table, holding a crystal flute of sparkling cider that I did not want feeling like an interloper in my own daughter's life. Emily was sitting on a throne-like chair in the center of the living room. She was 8 months pregnant, glowing with that ethereal beauty that only expectant mothers possess. But even in the dream, I could see the strain around her eyes. She looked at David not with love, but with a constant low-level anxiety, as if she were waiting for permission to be happy. David was everywhere at once. He was the perfect host. He was pouring drinks, slapping backs, and making loud jokes that made everyone laugh a little too hard. He looked golden, untouchable. James. A hand grabbed my elbow, sharp and urgent. I turned to see Sarah. My heart ached in the dream. Sarah had been my wife Martha's best friend since nursing school. She was a woman made of iron and antiseptic, a head nurse at Chicago General, who had seen more tragedy and miracles than any priest. She had passed away 3 years ago, but here she was alive. Her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes blazing with a fire I had forgotten. "Sarah," I said, smiling. "It is a lovely party, isn't it? David really went all out." She did not smile back. She dragged me away from the buffet, through the French doors, and out onto the patio. It was empty out there. The noise of the party was muffled by the thick glass. "Listen to me, James," she said. Her voice was low, a harsh whisper that cut through the cheerful atmosphere. "You need to wake up." "I am awake," I said, confused. "What is wrong? Is it Emily?" "It is him." She jerked her head toward the living room where David was holding court. "I was in the kitchen just now. I went to get some ice. He was on the phone. He didn't hear me come in." "So he is a businessman, Sarah. He is always on the phone." "He wasn't talking business, James. He was talking about insurance." I laughed. It was a dismissive, ignorant sound that I wish I could reach back through time and strangle myself for making. "Sarah, you are being paranoid. A new father should be thinking about life insurance. It is responsible." "Not life insurance," Sarah hissed. She gripped my arm tighter, her fingernails digging into the tweed of my jacket. "He was asking about the payout clauses. He asked if the policy covers complications during birth. And then he asked about the trust, the Sterling Trust." I stiffened. The Sterling Trust was the family legacy. It wasn't a fortune by billionaires' standards, but it was significant. My grandfather, a man who built clocks for railway stations, had set it up. It was designed to bypass generations, locking the capital away until a direct male heir was born and reached the age of majority, or until the legal guardian signed specific release forms upon the birth of said heir. It was a complex legal knot intended to protect the money from reckless spending. "He asked if the signature on the birth certificate triggers the guardian clause," Sarah said, her eyes wide and terrified. "James, he wasn't asking how to protect the baby. He was asking how to unlock the vault." "You are misinterpreting him," I said, pulling my arm away. I felt offended on Emily's behalf. "David loves her. Look at this house. Look at this party." "This house is a stage set," Sarah snapped, "and the party is a distraction. James, look at me. I have been a nurse for 30 years. I know when a man looks at a pregnant woman with love, and I know when a man looks at her like she is an incubator for a paycheck. There is something cold in him, something missing." She stepped closer, grabbing my lapels. "Do not let him sign the birth certificate," she commanded. "What? If he signs it, he is the legal father. He becomes the guardian of the heir. He gets control of the Sterling Trust until the boy is 21. James, I am begging you. Tell Emily to leave it blank. Tell her to say the father is unknown. Anything. Just keep his name off that legal document." "That is insane," I said. "He is the father. You want me to tell my daughter to bastardize her child to protect some money? Sarah, you have been working too many double shifts. You are seeing shadows where there are none." "The shadows are where the monsters hide," she cried out. Inside the house, the music stopped. David was tapping a spoon against a glass. "Speech, speech," the crowd chanted. "I have to go in," I said, brushing Sarah aside. "Stop this, Sarah. For Martha's sake, be happy for them." I walked back into the house. I left her standing on the patio alone in the cold spring wind. I can still feel the weight of her gaze on my back. It was heavy with pity. Inside, David was standing by the fireplace, one arm around Emily. He looked the picture of paternal devotion. "Thank you all for coming," David boomed, his voice rich and smooth. "Today isn't just about a baby. It is about legacy. It is about the future," the guests applauded. "And to honor that legacy," David continued, turning to look directly at me, "Emily and I have decided on a name. We want to honor the history of this family, the strength." He paused for effect. "His name will be Leo. Leo Sterling Miller Black." The room erupted in cheers. People clapped. I clapped. I felt a swell of pride. He was using the family name. He was honoring us. I looked out the window. Sarah was gone. Then the dream shifted. Time accelerated, blurring like a film reel skipping forward. We were in the hospital room. The smell of antiseptic was overpowering. Emily was holding the bundle of blankets that was my grandson. She was exhausted, pale, but smiling. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "Time for the paperwork, Dad." David stepped forward. He pulled a pen from his pocket. It was a Mont Blanc, black resin with gold trim. He uncapped it with a flourish. "James," a voice whispered in my ear. It was Sarah's voice echoing from the grave. "Stop him." In the dream, I tried to move. I tried to shout. But my feet were set in concrete. My mouth was sewn shut. I could only watch. David bent over the paper. The birth certificate. The most important contract a man ever signs. He didn't look at Leo. He didn't look at Emily. He looked at the paper with a hunger that made my stomach turn. He wasn't signing a declaration of love. He was signing a receipt. The pen touched the paper. Ink flowed. Black and permanent. David Black. He finished the signature and looked up. His eyes met mine in the dream. And then he winked. It wasn't a friendly wink. It was the wink of a magician who had just pulled off a trick right in front of your face. "Gotcha," he mouthed. Then, the paper burst into flames. The fire spread to the bed, to Emily, to the baby. I screamed, lunging forward to save them, but the floor opened up beneath me, and I fell into darkness. I woke up gasping, my lungs heaving, as if I had just surfaced from deep water. My shop was pitch black. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, skeletal shadows through the blinds. I was drenched in cold sweat. My heart was hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs, tick-tock, tick-tock, way too fast. I sat there in the silence, gripping the edge of my workbench, until my knuckles turned white. The dream faded, but the truth of it remained heavy and suffocating in the room. Sarah had been right. God help me, Sarah had been right about everything. I stood up, my legs shaky, and paced the small length of the shop. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. For 18 years I had told myself that David was just ambitious. That he was a bit aggressive, yes, but that he loved his family. I had rationalized his greed as a desire to provide. I had excused his coldness as stress. But the subconscious knows what the conscious mind refuses to accept. The sterling middle name. I had been so flattered at the time. I thought it was a tribute to my ancestors. But it wasn't. It was a requirement. The trust deed, I remembered reading it decades ago, stated specifically that the beneficiary must carry the sterling name to access the principal without board approval. David hadn't named his son. He had labeled an asset. I walked to the sink in the back and splashed cold water on my face. The shock of the cold helped settle my racing heart. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror above the basin. An old man. A fool. "You let him in," I whispered to my reflection. "You opened the door and invited the devil to dinner because he wore a nice suit." The guilt was a physical pain, sharp and twisting in my gut. Emily had suffered because of my blindness. She had lived her last years in a house that was a prison, married to a man who saw her only as a vessel for a trust fund. And when she died, the trust fully activated for Leo with David as the sole guardian. That was why Leo was going to business school. That was why David needed the money now. The trust must have had limitations, or perhaps David had already drained what he could and needed fresh capital to cover his tracks. And now he wanted the shop. He wanted the land. He wanted to erase the last vestige of the Miller independence. I looked at the tourbillon on my bench. It was a mechanism of pure logic. If a gear turned here, a lever moved there. Cause and effect. There was no room for lies in a watch movement. If a part was broken, the watch stopped. My family was broken. The mechanism of our lives had been sabotaged 18 years ago by a single signature. But I was a watchmaker. I did not throw broken things away. I fixed them. I dried my face with a rough towel. The fear from the dream was receding, replaced by a cold, hard determination. It was the same focus I felt when I was about to attempt a difficult repair. I needed to see the movement. I needed to open the case back of David's life and see the rot inside. "You think I am senile, David," I said to the empty room. You think I am just an old man who signs papers. I walked back to my desk. I picked up the blue folder, the contract he wanted me to sign on Friday. I did not open it. Instead, I reached for my set of precision screwdrivers. The dream had given me the key, the birth certificate, the trust. That was the leverage. If David had committed fraud, if he had coerced Emily, or if there was something even darker about his paternity claim. I remembered the detail about the insurance Sarah had mentioned. I needed proof. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Wednesday. I had 2 days until the party. 2 days to find the loose screw that would make David's entire carefully constructed world fall apart. I turned off the desk lamp. The darkness felt different now. It wasn't the darkness of despair. It was the cover of night, and I had work to do. I grabbed my coat. I wasn't going to wait for morning. I had a grandson to save, and for the first time in 20 years, I was wide awake. I arrived at the university campus just as the morning fog was lifting off the lake. It was a crisp, biting cold that stung my cheeks, but I barely felt it. I wasn't James Miller the watchmaker today. I was a man on a mission. I pulled my collar up, trying to blend in with the scattering of professors and early bird students shuffling toward the library. I knew Leo's schedule because he had emailed it to me at the start of the semester, a small act of rebellion he likely thought his father wouldn't notice. Wednesdays, 9 a.m., art history. The lecture hall was in the old stone building on the north side of the quad. I waited by a large oak tree near the side exit. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doors swung open and a stream of students poured out. I scanned the faces, feeling a sudden pang of anxiety. Would he even want to see me? Then I saw him. He looked taller than the last time, thinner too. He walked with his head down, shoulders hunched under the weight of a backpack that looked too heavy for him. He wasn't chatting with friends. He was isolated, moving quickly, as if trying to escape. "Leo," I called out softly as he passed. He froze. His head snapped up, and for a second I saw pure fear in his eyes, then recognition. "Grandpa." He looked around nervously, scanning the crowd. "What are you doing here? Is Dad with you?" "No," I said, stepping out from behind the tree. "I came alone. We need to talk." He dragged me toward a bench, hidden behind a row of hedges. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his hands twisting the strap of his bag. "If Dad finds out—" "Leo, look at me," I said, gripping his shoulder gently. "Your father told me you are going to the London School of Economics. He said you need money for tuition. He said you want me to sell the shop." Leo's face went white. "What? No, I never said that. He said you gave up on art." "I would never give up on art, Grandpa. That's all I have." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he wiped them away furiously. "He forced me to apply to the business program. He said if I didn't, he'd stop paying for your medication. He said you were sick, Grandpa. He said you were losing your mind and that he was the only one keeping you out of a state home." My blood ran cold. "He told you I was senile. He said you were forgetting things, that you were dangerous to yourself. He told me I couldn't see you because it would upset you." Leo looked at me, searching my face. "But you look fine. You look focused." "I am fine, Leo. Your father is lying. He is lying about everything." I squeezed his shoulder. "Listen to me. I am not selling the shop, and you are not going to London to study finance if you do not want to." "But he controls the money," Leo said, his voice trembling. "The trust fund. He says he's the only one who can sign off on my expenses." "We will see about that," I said grimly. "Go to your classes. Keep your head down. Do not tell him you saw me." "Can you do that?" He nodded. "Grandpa, be careful. He's been different lately, scarier. He screams at people on the phone at night." "I know. Go now." I watched him walk away, a boy being crushed by a man who should have been his protector. The anger in my chest was no longer a cold stone, it was a furnace. My next stop was the headquarters of Apex Horizon. I had the address from the blue folder. It was a skyscraper in the financial district, a glass needle piercing the sky. I walked into the lobby. Marble floors, abstract art that looked like spilled paint, and a security desk that looked like the bridge of a spaceship. I told the guard I was a courier delivering a package for David Black. I held up a generic brown envelope I had stuffed with old newspapers. "Leave it here," the guard said, barely looking up from his screen. "Direct delivery only," I insisted, tapping a fake label I had printed out. "Signature required. Very sensitive documents." He sighed, checked a list, and waved me toward the elevators. 24th floor, Suite 2400. The elevator ride was smooth and silent. When the doors opened on the 24th floor, I expected a bustling office. Phones ringing, people rushing about with coffee, the hum of commerce. Instead, I stepped into silence. The reception desk was empty. The lights in the main bullpen were off. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the plush carpet. There were rows of cubicles, but most were empty. No photos of families, no personal items. Just dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. This wasn't a thriving corporation. It was a ghost ship. I heard a voice coming from a corner office at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. I crept closer, pressing myself against the wall. "I don't care what the interest rate is." It was David. He was shouting, "I need the bridge loan by Monday. The collateral is secure. The old man is signing on Friday." "Yes, the whole block. It's prime real estate. No, listen to me. If you call in the note now, we all go down. Do you hear me? We all burn." There was a pause, then the sound of something heavy slamming onto a desk. "Damn it!" I held my breath. He was desperate. He wasn't expanding. He was drowning. He needed my land not for a new project, but to pay off debts that were threatening to swallow him whole. I slipped the envelope onto a random desk near the door and backed away toward the elevators. I had seen enough. Apex Horizon was a shell, a Ponzi scheme running on fumes and lies. I exited the building, my heart pounding. I needed fresh air. I walked a few blocks away from the sterile financial district, finding myself in a narrow alley behind a row of restaurants. That was when I saw her. Eleanor. She was digging through a dumpster behind an Italian bistro. She looked even more ragged than she had in my shop, her coat stained with grease. "Eleanor!" I called out. She jumped, dropping a half-eaten breadstick. When she saw it was me, she relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained guarded. "Mr. Watchmaker," she said. Her voice was raspy. "You are far from your clocks." "I bought you lunch," I said, ignoring her comment. I walked over to a nearby food truck and bought 2 hot turkey sandwiches and 2 coffees. I handed one set to her. She took it without a word, unwrapping the foil with surprising delicacy. We stood in the alley, eating in silence for a moment. "You are looking for answers," she said, suddenly wiping crumbs from her chin. It wasn't a question. "I found some," I admitted. "But I have a feeling there are more." She chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Time is a funny thing, James. We think it is a straight line, but it is a circle. What goes around comes around. The truth is not hidden. It is just waiting for the right second to tick." She reached into her deep coat pocket, the same one that had held the Patek Philippe, and pulled out a folded, yellowed newspaper. It was the Financial Times, dated 3 weeks ago. "Read page 4, she said, handing it to me. "Bottom corner." I unfolded the paper. It was an article about a series of investigations into offshore shell companies used for money laundering in the real estate sector. One of the names mentioned as a person of interest was a partner at a firm called Blackstone Associates. "Black," I whispered. "David Black." "Names change," Eleanor said, sipping her coffee. "Faces change. But greed is a constant. He is running out of time, James. And a man running out of time is dangerous." She looked at me, and for a fleeting second, the vagrant facade dropped completely. Her posture straightened, her gaze became piercing. "Be careful where you step. The floor is rotten." Before I could ask her more, she turned and shuffled away down the alley, dissolving into the shadows of the city. I went home. The shop was quiet, but it no longer felt safe. It felt like the eye of a storm. I sat at my workbench and pulled out the old file box where I kept Emily's important papers. I needed to see the will again, the one David had produced so quickly after she died. I placed the document under my microscope. I adjusted the light source to a low angle to catch the texture of the ink. I, Emily Miller Black, being of sound mind. I skipped to the bottom. The signature, Emily Miller Black. It looked perfect to the naked eye. But under 20 times magnification, the flaws screamed at me. Emily had been an artist like Leo. Her hand was fluid, confident. When she signed her name, the end of the Y and the K always tapered off into a sharp, swift tail, like a brushstroke lifting off a canvas. I looked at the ink on the will. At the end of the K, there was a tiny, microscopic pool of ink. A hesitate mark. A dot. That happens when the hand stops moving before lifting the pen. It happens when someone is drawing a signature, not writing it. It happens when someone is tracing. My breath caught in my throat. He had forged it. He had forged her will. He had stolen everything from her, even her final wishes. And if he forged this, he forged the birth certificate. Sarah was right. He wasn't just a bad father. He was a criminal. A parasite who had attached himself to my family to suck us dry. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. I had the motive, massive debt. I had the method, forgery and manipulation. I had the victim, my grandson. But knowing it wasn't enough. I needed him to confess. I needed him to say it in his own words in front of witnesses, or at least on a recording that would hold up in court. I looked at the tourbillon again. The mechanism was exposed, vulnerable, yet functioning perfectly, because every part did its job. I needed a mechanism of my own. I reached into my drawer and pulled out my own pocket watch. It was a sturdy silver piece I had made myself years ago. I opened the back. There was just enough space between the movement and the case. I took my phone and ordered a micro recorder, the kind private investigators use. High fidelity, long battery life, tiny form factor. I paid for overnight shipping. I would modify the watch. I would hollow out a section of the brass movement holder to fit the recorder inside. It would be invisible. I would wear it to the party on Friday. I would let David think he had won. I would let him gloat. I would let him stand on a stage and shine his fake gold light on everyone. And then I would record the sound of his world shattering. Self-preservation, I whispered, testing the weight of the silver watch in my hand. It is not just about surviving David. It is about making sure the predator never hunts again. The Grand Millennium Hotel was the kind of place that people who had never held a hammer thought was classy. It was all gilt edges, faux marble columns, and crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen explosions of glass. To my eyes, trained to spot the difference between a true gemstone and a piece of cut quartz, the whole ballroom looked like a cheap watch movement, encased in gold plating. It sparkled, but it had no heart. It was 7 o'clock on Friday evening. I stood near the entrance of the Sapphire Ballroom, clutching a glass of lukewarm water that a waiter had thrust into my hand before vanishing. I was wearing my best suit, a charcoal tweed number that I had bought for Emily's wedding 20 years ago. Back then, it had been stylish. Now, surrounded by men in Italian silk tuxedos and women wearing gowns that cost more than my car, I looked exactly like what David wanted me to look like. An artifact. A dusty relic from a bygone era that had wandered into the future by mistake. The room was packed with the elite of the city, or at least the people who desperately wanted to be seen as the elite. I recognized a few faces from the business pages of the newspaper. There were hedge fund managers, property developers, and a few local politicians who laughed too loudly at jokes that were not funny. They swarmed around the open bar and the hors d'oeuvre trays like sharks in a feeding frenzy, their eyes constantly darting around the room to see if there was anyone more important to talk to. David was in his element. He stood in the center of the room, holding court. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo with a black velvet lapel. He looked sharp, successful, and utterly hollow. He was laughing at something a short, bald man was saying, his head thrown back, his hand resting casually on the shoulder of a young woman who was definitely not a business partner. Then he saw me. His smile did not falter, but his eyes changed. They went from warm to calculating in a fraction of a second. He excused himself from his admirers and glided toward me across the polished floor. "James," he said, his voice booming enough for the nearby groups to hear. "I am so glad you made it. I was worried you might have forgotten the time again." He gripped my shoulder. It was not a hug. It was a restraint. "I did not forget David," I said, keeping my voice low. My hand drifted instinctively to my vest pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of the silver pocket watch. The micro recorder inside was running. The tiny red light was taped over, but I knew it was there, catching every syllable. David turned to the group of people standing nearest to us. They held champagne flutes and looked at me with polite curiosity. "Everyone, I want you to meet my father-in-law, James Miller," David announced. His tone was dripping with performative sympathy. James is a master watchmaker. Or he was until recently. It has been hard for him since Emily passed. The isolation, the confusion. He tapped his own temple significantly, a gesture that screamed, he is losing his marbles. The guests cooed sympathetically. "Oh, that is so difficult," a woman in a red dress said, looking at me as if I were a stray dog. "It is so wonderful that you are taking care of him, David. Most people would just put them in a home," David sighed, looking tragically heroic. "Well, family is family. We do what we must." James has decided to retire and move to a facility in Florida where he can get the care he needs. Tonight, we are just finalizing the sale of his old shop to Apex Horizon so we can secure his future. I stood there, stone-faced. The rage was a cold knot in my chest, but I let my shoulders slump. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I played the part. If he wanted a senile old man, I would give him one. "It is for the best," I mumbled, slurring my words just a little. "The gears. They are too small now," David beamed. "Exactly. See, he knows it is time." He steered me deeper into the room, parading me like a trophy. I was the prop in his play of the benevolent son-in-law. Every handshake, every pitying look I received was another brick in the wall he was building around the truth. He was establishing a public narrative. If I tried to fight him later, all these witnesses would testify that I was confused, frail, and grateful for David's help. I scanned the room for Leo. I finally found him standing in the far corner near a potted palm tree. He looked miserable. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit that hung off his thin frame, and he was staring at his shoes. He looked like a prisoner waiting for sentencing. I tried to catch his eye. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't do it, Grandpa," his eyes seemed to say. "Run." I gave him a small nod of reassurance. "Wait," I thought. "Just wait, Leo." David clapped his hands, and the sound echoed through the microphone system. The room fell silent. The lights dimmed, leaving a single spotlight trained on a raised platform at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, investors," David said, his voice amplified and smooth as velvet. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Apex Horizon. Tonight is not just a celebration of the past. It is a launchpad for the future." Applause rippled through the room. As you know, our flagship project, the Apex Tower, has been in the planning stages for 2 years. It will be a beacon of modernity in the historic district, a fusion of luxury and heritage. And tonight, I am proud to announce that we have acquired the final parcel of land required to break ground. He gestured to me. "Please welcome to the stage Mr. James Miller, my father-in-law, the man who is making this dream possible." The applause was polite but enthusiastic. David grabbed my arm and practically dragged me up the stairs to the stage. The lights were blinding. I blinked, shielding my eyes. It felt like an interrogation room. In the center of the stage was a long mahogany table. On it sat a single document, bound in blue leather, and a gold pen. Standing beside the table was a man I recognized immediately from the descriptions Leo had given me. Vance, David's lawyer. Vance looked exactly like a rodent that had somehow learned to wear a suit. He had a pointed nose, small, watery eyes that darted back and forth, and a thin, nervous smile that revealed too much gum. He was rubbing his hands together as we approached. Mr. Miller Vance said, his voice oily and high-pitched. "An honor. Truly. Please take a seat." He pulled out a heavy leather chair. I sat down. The table was too high, making me feel small, like a child at a grown-up dinner. This was intentional, of course. Everything was theater. David stood behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It looked supportive to the audience. To me, it felt like a heavy weight pushing me down. "Tonight," David said to the crowd, "James is signing the transfer deed for the property at 47 Oak Street. In exchange, the Sterling Trust will ensure he lives out his remaining years in comfort and dignity." He leaned down and whispered in my ear, his voice low and venomous. "Smile, James. You are on camera." I looked out at the sea of faces. They were blurry in the darkness beyond the spotlight. I saw greed. I saw indifference. I saw a room full of people who would strip a carcass clean and call it business. Vance opened the blue folder. The contract lay there, crisp and white. "Just here," Mr. Miller Vance said, pointing a manicured finger at the signature line. And here, it is all standard. We just need to make it official." He held out the gold pen. It was heavy, expensive, probably charged to the company account that was currently empty. I reached out and took the pen. My hand trembled. I did not have to fake it entirely. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was making my nerves fire rapidly. But I exaggerated it. I let the pen hover over the paper, shaking like a leaf in the wind. "Oh, look at that," David said to the crowd, a fake chuckle in his voice. "Nerves. It is a big moment. Take your time, Dad." I looked at the document. Transfer of deed, waiver of rights, power of attorney. It was a death warrant for my life's work. I looked up at David. He was smiling down at me, his eyes hard and expectant. "Do it," he mouthed. I looked at Vance. The lawyer was practically drooling, his eyes fixed on the pen tip. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip touched the fiber. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. The investors were holding their breath, waiting for their millions to be unlocked. I took a breath. I prepared to write the first letter of my name, but not the name they expected. I was going to write fraud, but I never got the chance. Boom! The double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They were thrown open with such force that they banged against the walls with a sound like a gunshot. Heads snapped around. The silence shattered. David frowned, looking up from the contract. "What the hell?" he muttered. Security. Two large security guards in black suits stepped forward to intercept the intruder, but they were immediately shoved aside by 4 uniformed police officers who marched into the room with grim determination. Behind the police came 2 men in dark suits who moved with the fluid, dangerous grace of private military contractors. And walking between them was a woman. The room gasped. It was Eleanor. But it was not the Eleanor I had met in the alley. It was not the Eleanor who wore rags and smelled of rain. This woman was a queen. She was wearing a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like water under the chandeliers. Around her neck was a diamond necklace that was so large, so brilliant, it made the crystal fixtures above look like cheap plastic. Her gray hair, previously matted and wild, was styled in an elegant, architectural updraft that highlighted her sharp cheekbones. She walked with a cane, but not for support. It was an accessory, a scepter. It was black ebony topped with a silver handle in the shape of a hawk's head. She moved through the crowd, like Moses parting the Red Sea. People scrambled to get out of her way, spilling drinks, tripping over themselves. The aura of power radiating from her was physical. It hit you in the chest. David's hand fell from my shoulder. He stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Vance dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a loud thud. Eleanor stopped at the foot of the stage. She looked up at David. Her eyes were the same ones I had seen in the alley, sharp, intelligent, terrifying, but now they were backed by the full weight of authority. "David Black," she said. Her voice was not raspy anymore. It was clear, resonant, and cold, as liquid nitrogen. David stammered. I am sorry, this is a private event." "Who are you? Security, get this woman out." The hotel manager, a sweating man in a tuxedo, came running out from the side, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. "Mr. Black," he squeaked. "Mr. Black, please. That is Eleanor Vanderhoven." The name hit the room like a bomb. I saw the recognition ripple through the crowd. Whispers broke out. Vanderhoven. The real estate mogul, the owner of the Millennium Group. I thought she was a recluse. I thought she was in Europe. David went white. Not pale. White. Like a sheet of paper. "Eleanor," he whispered. But I have been trying to get a meeting with your office for 6 months. "I know," Eleanor said calmly. She tapped her cane on the floor. "And while you were sending emails to my assistants, I was sitting in a watch shop on the south side, watching you kick an old man and threaten your own family." She slowly ascended the stairs to the stage. The police officers fanned out, blocking the exits. Her private security stood at the base of the stairs, arms crossed. She reached the table. She looked at me and offered a small, warm smile. A genuine smile. "Hello, James," she said softly. "I believe that pen does not belong to you." She reached out and gently took the gold pen from my shaking hand. She held it up to the light, inspecting it with disdain. Then she turned to David. "You invited investors here tonight to celebrate a deal," Eleanor said, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "You told them you had the backing of the Vanderhoven Group. You told them my bank was underwriting your loans." David was trembling now. Real trembling, not the fake kind I had performed. "Mrs. Vanderhoven, please. We can discuss this in private. There must be a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Eleanor said. She looked at the crowd. "I am here to clarify the market position. Apex Horizon has no capital. It has no land. And as of 10 minutes ago, it has no credit line. My bank has frozen your accounts, David. All of them." The crowd erupted. Shouts of anger. People pulling out phones. Eleanor turned back to Vance. The lawyer looked like he was trying to shrink into the floorboards. "And you," she said. "Mr. Vance, I believe the Bar Association is very interested in your creative approach to estate law." She looked at me again. "James," she said, "show them." I stood up. My knees were steady now. I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out the silver watch. I pressed the small catch that opened the back case. The micro-recorder was there, spinning silently. I looked at David. He was staring at the watch with horror. He realized in that second that while he was playing checkers, I had been building the board. I walked over to the microphone. The room quieted down, sensing blood. "I am not senile, David," I said into the mic. My voice was loud, clear, and angry. "And I am not signing anything. But I think everyone here should hear what you really think of your investors. And your family." I held the watch up to the microphone. David lunged for me. "Give me that," he screamed. But he never reached me. One of Eleanor's bodyguards moved with a speed that blurred the eye. He intercepted David, twisting his arm behind his back and slamming him face first onto the mahogany table. The blue folder slid to the floor. I pressed play. The sound of the bodyguard slamming David onto the table was satisfying, a dull thud that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the stage. But the chaos was far from over. The room was a cacophony of gasps, shattered glass, and the frantic murmurs of Chicago's elite, realizing their evening of self-congratulation had turned into a crime scene. David, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer inability to accept defeat, scrambled up from the mahogany table. His nose was bleeding a stark crimson line against his pale skin, ruining the perfection of his tuxedo. He did not look at the bodyguard. He did not look at the police. His eyes locked onto Eleanor, who was standing at the foot of the stairs, like an avenging angel in midnight blue silk. But David did not see an angel. He did not even see the billionaire matriarch of the Vanderhoven Empire. In his panic, his mind snapped back to the last time he had seen her face in my shop, wearing rags, smelling of rain. "Security!" David screamed, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "Why is she here? Who let her in?" "That is the beggar. That is the homeless woman from the watch shop." He turned to the crowd, his arms waving frantically. "This is a setup," he bellowed. "James hired her. She is an actress. She is a vagrant. Get her out of here. She is contaminating the room." The silence that followed was excruciating. It was the silence of 100 people watching a man dig his own grave with a spoon. From the side of the room, a man in a tuxedo sprinted toward the stage. It was Mr. Sterling, the hotel manager. I had never seen a man run so fast in patent leather shoes. He looked like he was about to weep with terror. He threw himself between David and Eleanor, nearly tripping over the hem of her gown. "Mr. Black, shut up," the manager hissed, his face draining of blood. He turned to Eleanor and bowed. He actually bowed, a deep 90-degree bend at the waist that was almost comical in its subservience. "Madame Vanderhoven," the manager stammered, his voice shaking so hard it was barely audible. We did not know you were in residence. If we had known. The presidential suite. The red carpet. Please accept my humblest apologies." David froze. The finger he was pointing at her wavered. "What?" The manager straightened up, glaring at David with pure venom. "Mr. Black, you will lower your voice. You are speaking to Eleanor Vanderhoven, the owner of this hotel, the owner of this building, and the majority shareholder of the Millennium Group." The name hung in the air like smoke. Vanderhoven. I watched David's face. It was like watching a building demolition in slow motion. The arrogance crumbled first, falling away, to reveal confusion. Then, the confusion cracked, revealing fear. And finally, the fear gave way to a hollow, devastating realization. He had kicked Eleanor Vanderhoven out of a chair. He had called her a junkie. He had told her she was dirtying the furniture. Eleanor did not even blink. She looked at David with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were a particularly noisy insect. She tapped her cane on the floor once, twice, a sound that cut through the tension like a gavel. "You have a very loud voice, Mr. Black," she said. Her tone was conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. "It compensates, I suppose, for your lack of vision." She walked up the remaining stairs. The police officers parted for her. The bodyguards stepped back. She took the center of the stage, displacing David without even touching him. She placed her cane against the table and reached into her small beaded clutch. "You called this man," she gestured to me, "senile. You called him confused. You told these people," she swept her hand across the audience, "that he was mentally incompetent." She pulled out the watch. It was the Patek Philippe. The silver case caught the spotlight, gleaming with a soft lunar radiance. It no longer looked like a piece of junk. It looked like what it was, a masterpiece. "Do you know what this is, David?" she asked. David stared at the watch. It is the garbage you brought into the shop." "It is a 1928 Patek Philippe Gondolo," she corrected him. "One of only 12 ever made with this specific dial configuration. It was a gift from my father on my 16th birthday. It is worth more than your car, more than your house, possibly more than this entire sham of a company you have built." A gasp went through the room. The investors in the front row leaned forward. "I brought this to your shop in pieces," Eleanor continued. "It was dirty. It was tarnished. I looked like a beggar. And because of that, you saw nothing but trash. You tried to throw me out into the rain." She turned to me. Her eyes softened, and for a moment the Iron Lady was gone, replaced by the friend I had shared tea with. But, James, she said, her voice swelling with emotion. James looked past the dirt. He looked past the tarnish. He listened to the mechanism. He saw the value inside. He fixed it not for money, I offered him none, but because he could not bear to see something beautiful remain broken. He fixed it with his heart. She held the watch up high. This is the difference between a man of substance and a man of straw, she declared. James Miller is a craftsman. He builds things that last. You, Mr. Black, you just paint over the rust. David looked like he was going to be sick. He loosened his tie, sweat pouring down his face. This is irrelevant, he shouted, trying to regain control of the narrative. So, she is rich. So what? That doesn't change the fact that James is sick. He is incompetent. And she is probably senile too. She is just an eccentric old woman. He turned to the audience, desperation making his eyes wild. She doesn't know anything about business, he insisted. Apex Horizon is a cutting-edge firm. We have assets. We have the backing of... You have nothing, Eleanor cut him off. The sharpness of her voice silenced him instantly. She reached into her clutch again and pulled out a folded document. It was not a glossy brochure like David's. It was a thick gray report stamped with the logo of a forensic accounting firm. I had my auditors look into Apex Horizon 3 days ago, she announced. I was curious, you see. You had been pestering my lending officers for a bridge loan of $5 million. David flinched at the number. What we found, Eleanor said, holding up the report, was fascinating. Apex Horizon owns no land, not a single square foot. The luxury condos you are selling deposits for. They do not have permits. The capital reserves you list in your prospectus, they are empty shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. She threw the report onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap next to the unsigned deed. It is a Ponzi scheme, ladies and gentlemen, she said to the crowd. He is using new investor money to pay the interest on loans he took out to pay previous investors. And now the money has run out. He needed James's property not to build a tower, but to mortgage it immediately to keep the lights on for another month. The room erupted. It was pandemonium. Men in expensive suits started shouting. A woman in the second row fainted. People were surging toward the stage, demanding answers. My money, someone screamed. Where is my $200,000? You said the permits were approved, another shouted. David held up his hands, backing away, until he hit the table. No, she is lying. It is a hostile takeover. She is trying to devalue the stock to buy it cheap. There is no stock, David, Eleanor shouted over the noise. It is smoke. It is all smoke. The police officers moved in closer, forming a barrier between the angry mob and the stage. David looked trapped. He looked at Vance, his lawyer, but Vance was already gone. He had slipped away during the chaos, abandoning his sinking ship. David turned to me. His eyes were pleading now. The arrogance was gone, stripped away to reveal the frightened child underneath. Dad, he whined. Dad, tell them. Tell them we are partners. Tell them about the family trust. I did it for Leo. I did it for us. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had lied to my daughter. The man who had stolen my grandson's future. The man who had tried to put me in an asylum to cover his own failures. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger I had carried for days had crystallized into something hard and unbreakable. You did nothing for us, I said quietly. Eleanor stepped back, giving me the floor. She nodded to me. Mr. James, she said, I think it is time. You have something else to show them, do you not? I stood up straight. I buttoned my jacket. I felt 68 years of fatigue lift off my shoulders. I was not a victim. I was the grandfather of Leo Sterling Miller Black, and I was about to clean house. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver pocket watch again. But this time, I did not just hold it up. I pressed the small release catch on the side. The back case popped open. With steady fingers that had manipulated gears the size of eyelashes, I reached inside the mechanism. I bypassed the balance wheel. I ignored the mainspring. I pulled on a small, disguised lever I had installed the night before. The false bottom of the movement clicked and slid open. Inside, nestled where the resonance chamber should have been, was the micro recorder. It was tiny black and blinking with a steady red light. "You said I was confused, David?" I said, my voice amplified by the microphone, steady and strong. "You said I did not know what was happening, but I have been listening. I have been listening to everything." I held the recorder up. "This," I said to the crowd, "is not a watch, it is a witness." David's face went from white to gray. He lunged again, a desperate animalistic movement. "No, don't!" But the bodyguard was faster. He grabbed David by the collar of his tuxedo and yanked him back. David flailed his feet, leaving the ground looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "Let him go!" David screamed. "That is illegal! That is entrapment!" "It is self-preservation," I said. I looked at the recorder. I found the small play button. The room fell silent again. The mob stopped shouting. The investors held their breath. Even the police officers turned to watch. I pressed the button. A hiss of static echoed through the speakers, followed by a voice. It was unmistakably David's voice. Clear, arrogant, and damning. "I don't care what the interest rate is, I need the bridge loan by Monday. The old man is signing on Friday. If you call in the note now, we all go down. Do you hear me? We all burn." I let it play. I let the words hang in the air. But I wasn't done. I skipped forward. The signature on the will was easy. The recording continued. David's voice, again this time, lower, more conspiratorial. She was so sick at the end she couldn't even hold a pen. I traced it. "Nobody checks these things, Vance. And the birth certificate, please. I signed that 18 years ago. That money is mine. The kid is just the key to the lock." The gasp that went through the room this time was not of anger. It was of horror. David stopped struggling. He hung in the bodyguard's grip, limp. He stared at the floor, defeated. I stopped the recording. "You traced it," I said, looking at the top of his head. "You forged Emily's will. And you lied about Leo." I turned to the police officer standing nearest to me. He was a captain, a large man with a stern face. "Officer," I said, "I believe this constitutes a confession." The captain nodded grimly. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked a sharp mechanical sound that was music to my ears. "David Black," the captain said, walking toward him. "You are under arrest." I looked at Eleanor. She was smiling at me. It was a fierce, proud smile. I looked for Leo in the corner. He was crying, but he wasn't looking at his shoes anymore. He was looking at me. And for the first time in years, he looked safe. I put the recorder back in the watch and snapped the case shut. Tick, tock. The time of David Black was over. The silence in the Sapphire Ballroom was heavy, pressing down on us like a physical weight. The echo of David's voice from the recording admitting to the forgery of my daughter's will had sucked the air out of the room. The investors who had been clamoring for their money were now quiet, staring at the man they had trusted with their fortunes, seeing him for the first time as a common criminal. But I was not done. I had peeled back the first layer of the onion, the financial rot, but the core, the personal, venomous core, was still waiting to be exposed. I looked at David. He was slumped in the grip of Eleanor's bodyguard, his tuxedo jacket bunched up around his ears, his face a mask of sweaty terror. He was looking at the recorder in my hand, as if it were a gun pointed at his head. "You think that is the worst of it?" I asked into the microphone. My voice was steady, fueled by a cold, hard anger that had been tempering in my soul for 5 years. "You think stealing money is the worst thing you did?" David's eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. There were none. Even Vance, his slippery lawyer, had vanished into the shadows. "I have more," I said. I pressed the button on the silver watch again. The tiny red light blinked. The static hissed for a second, and then David's voice filled the room once more. This time he was not shouting. He was laughing. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that made my skin crawl. "The old man is the easy part, Vance. I have Dr. Evans lined up. He owes me a favor from that malpractice suit I settled for him. He will sign the competency affidavit on Monday morning. We will put James in the Sunset Hills facility, the memory care unit. Lock the door, throw away the key. Once he is declared incompetent, I get power of attorney over the shop and the remaining assets. He will be dead within a year in there. They all are." The crowd gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. The police captain stepped closer to the stage, his hand resting heavily on his baton. "Sunset Hills," Vance's voice on the recording was nervous. "David, that place is a warehouse for the dying. It has been cited for neglect 3 times. "Exactly," David's voice replied, cold and practical. "Cheaper rates, more profit for us. The old man is just a liability, Vance. Just like Emily was at the end. A drain on resources." I stopped the recording. The silence this time was not shocked. It was murderous. To steal from investors was one thing, to plot the imprisonment and slow death of a grieving father. A man who had cooked you dinner, fixed your watches, and welcomed you into his home was a level of depravity that even this room of sharks could not stomach. "You monster," someone whispered. David snapped. He let out a feral growl and lunged toward me again, his face twisted into a snarl. "Give me that. It is illegal. You cannot record me without my consent. I will sue you. I will sue all of you." The bodyguard did not even blink. He simply tightened his grip, wrenching David's arm up behind his back, until David cried out in pain and dropped to his knees. "Stay down," the bodyguard commanded. I walked to the edge of the stage. I looked down at David kneeling on the polished wood. He looked small now, pathetic, but I felt no pity. "You wanted to lock me away," I said. "You wanted to erase me so you could sell my life's work to pay your gambling debts. But that is not why I despise you, David. I could forgive you for the money. Money is just paper. I can always make more watches." I took a step closer. The microphone caught the tremor in my breath. "I despise you because of what you did to my daughter, and what you did to my grandson." David looked up. "I took care of them," he spat, saliva flying from his lips. "I gave them a life of luxury. I gave them this." He gestured with his head to the opulent ballroom. "You gave them a cage," I said, "and you filled it with lies." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a standard white envelope. It was not dramatic like the watch. It was just paper. But inside was the truth that would sever the last tendon holding David's world together. "Do you remember the baby shower, David?" I asked. 18 years ago. Do you remember my wife's best friend, Sarah? The nurse you laughed at. The woman you said was a crazy old bat." David blinked, confusion clouding his panic. "What? Who cares about some dead nurse?" "She warned me," I said. "She told me not to let you sign the birth certificate. She told me you were only interested in the Sterling Trust. I didn't listen to her then. I laughed just like you. But 3 days ago, after I found the forged will, I remembered her words. And I started thinking about secrets. The kind of secrets a man hides when he is desperate." I held up the envelope. "I went to your house while you were at the office, David. I went into your bathroom. I took a hair sample from your razor. And I took a sample from Leo's hairbrush." David's face went rigid. The color did not just drain from his face. It seemed to evaporate, leaving him looking like a corpse. He stopped struggling against the bodyguard. He stopped breathing. "No," he whispered. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. "I ran a rapid DNA panel," I announced to the room. "I paid extra for the 24-hour turnaround. It is amazing what science can do these days, isn't it?" I opened the envelope and pulled out the results. 1. single sheet of paper. The probability of paternity, I read aloud, my voice ringing off the rafters, is 0%. The room did not gasp this time. They froze. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. I looked directly at Leo. He was standing in the corner, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Leo," I said gently, speaking only to him, now ignoring the hundreds of people watching. "He is not your father." Leo stumbled back against the wall. He looked from me to David, his mind racing to process the impossible. "But," Leo stammered, "but the birth certificate." "He signed it," I said, turning my gaze back to David, who was now shaking uncontrollably. "He signed it because the Sterling Trust, my family's money, only unlocks for a direct male heir. He needed a son to get the keys to the vault. So he claimed you." "That is a lie," David screamed. "She cheated on me. Emily was a whore. She tricked me." "Shut up," I roared. The sound of my own voice surprised me. It was the roar of a father defending his child. "Do not you dare speak her name with your filthy mouth." I turned to the crowd. "David is infertile. He has been sterile since his 20s. It was a medical condition he hid from everyone to protect his fragile ego. But Emily knew. They wanted a child. So they used a donor. Artificial insemination. It was supposed to be their secret. A family built on love regardless of biology." I pointed a shaking finger at David. "But you weaponized it. You used it against her." I looked at David and I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew I knew. "I found Emily's diary," I lied. "I hadn't found a diary, but I knew my daughter. I knew how she broke." And I saw the flicker of recognition in David's eyes that confirmed my theory. "You told her that if she ever tried to leave you, if she ever tried to stop you from spending the trust money, you would tell the world that Leo was a bastard. You told her you would have the trust dissolved and leave her and the boy penniless. You told her she was broken." David looked down at the floor. He didn't deny it. "You tormented her," I continued, my voice thick with tears I refused to shed. "When she got sick, when the cancer started. Stress feeds cancer, David. You fed it. You held this secret over her head like a guillotine every single day. You made her feel small. You made her feel guilty for a medical choice you both made. You killed her spirit long before the disease killed her body." "I did what I had to do," David shrieked. He suddenly surged upward, throwing the bodyguard off balance with the sheer force of his hysteria. He stood up, disheveled, wild-eyed, looking like a cornered rat. "I put up with her," he screamed at the audience. "I put up with her whining. I put up with her sickness. I drove her to the chemo appointments. I sat in those waiting rooms for hours." He pounded his chest. "I earned that money. I earned it. Who cares about DNA? I paid for the diapers. I paid for the private schools. I signed the checks. That makes me the father. That makes me the owner." He turned to Leo, pointing a finger that looked like a claw. "You ungrateful little brat. Everything you have is because of me, because I was smart enough to sign that paper. You think you are an artist. You are nothing without my money. You are just a biological experiment that I authorized." Leo stepped out from the corner. For a moment I was terrified. I thought he would collapse. I thought he would break. He was 18 years old, a sensitive boy who drew charcoal portraits and listened to classical music. But as he walked toward the stage, I saw something change in his face. The fear that had defined his features for as long as I could remember, the flinch when David raised his voice. The hunch in his shoulders, it vanished. He looked at David and he didn't look angry. He looked relieved. It was the relief of a prisoner who realizes the chains were never actually locked. "You are not my father," Leo said. His voice was quiet, but in the silent room, it carried like a bell. "I am your legal guardian," David shouted. "I own you until you are 21. "No," Eleanor spoke up. She had been standing silently, letting us handle this, but now she stepped forward. "Actually, David, you do not." She tapped her cane on the floor. "Since the signature on the birth certificate was fraudulent, based on a willful deception regarding biological paternity to defraud a trust, it is void ab initio. From the beginning," she smiled a shark-like grin. "And since James here is the closest living blood relative, guess who the legal guardian is?" David looked at Eleanor. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the police captain, who was now unhooking a pair of handcuffs from his belt with a very deliberate click. The reality finally hit him. The wall of narcissism, the delusion of grandeur, the gold plating, it all shattered. "No," David whimpered. "No, wait. We can work this out. James' dad. Look, I was stressed. The market is tough. I needed a win." He took a step toward me, his hands out, pleading. "I am family, James. We are family." I looked at him. I saw the man who had worn a fake watch to his wedding. The man who had worn a fake mask of success for 20 years. The man who had hollowed out my daughter and tried to hollow out me. "You are not family," I said coldly. "You are just a broken mechanism. And you are not worth fixing." I turned my back on him. "Captain," I said. "Please remove the trash," David screamed, as the officers grabbed him. It wasn't a word, it was a raw, animalistic sound of rage and despair. He kicked and thrashed, knocking over the mahogany table, sending the forged deed and the fake reports scattering across the stage. "I am David Black," he howled as they dragged him down the stairs. "I am a CEO. You cannot do this to me. I own this city. I own all of you." The guests parted like the Red Sea, shrinking away from him, as if he were contagious. They watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the golden boy of Chicago real estate was hauled out, the double doors, his tuxedo torn, his dignity non-existent, screaming about money that never existed, and a son who never belonged to him. When the doors slammed shut, the silence that followed was profound. I stood on the stage, the microphone still in my hand. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I looked over at Leo. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling. He ran up the stairs. He didn't care about the police or the billionaire or the hundreds of staring eyes. He ran to me and buried his face in my chest. "Grandpa," he sobbed. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight, smelling the faint scent of turpentine and youth. I held him like I used to hold Emily. "It is okay, Leo," I whispered into his hair. "The clock is reset. We are starting over, from zero." I looked up and saw Eleanor watching us. She nodded once, a slow, solemn gesture of respect. Then she turned to the shocked crowd. "The bar is open," she announced dryly. "And I believe Mr. Miller has a tab." But I didn't care about the tab. I didn't care about the investors or the hotel. I only cared about the boy in my arms and the fact that for the first time in 18 years, the snake was out of the garden. The chaos in the Sapphire Ballroom did not subside, it mutated. What had been a shocked silence, following the revelation of the DNA test, transformed instantly into a frenzied, violent uproar the moment the police captain snapped the handcuffs onto David's wrists. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into a million sharp, dangerous shards. "David Black," the captain announced, his voice booming over the commotion without the need for a microphone. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery of legal documents, and grand larceny." The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the signal the room had been waiting for. The spell of David's golden boy persona was broken, and the wolves turned on their leader. The investors, the men and women who had stood around sipping champagne and congratulating David just an hour ago, surged forward. The police line held but barely. These were not people used to losing money. They were people used to winning, and the realization that they had been swindled by a man who didn't even own the suit on his back drove them into a primal rage. "You liar!" A man in a tuxedo screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He was the head of a local pension fund, a man David had courted for months. "I signed those transfers this morning, $2 million. Where is it, David? Where is the money?" "It is gone, Bob," David shouted back, his voice high and hysterical as the officers hauled him to his feet. "It is just a liquidity issue. I can fix it. Just give me a week." "You do not have a week," another woman yelled. She was a property developer known for her ruthlessness. She tore a contract in half and threw the pieces at him like confetti. "I am suing you for everything. I will take your car, your house, the fillings in your teeth." "I have nothing," David shrieked, the truth finally ripped out of him by fear. "It is all leveraged. I have nothing." While the mob bayed for blood, I saw movement in the periphery of my vision. Vance, the lawyer with the face of a rodent, was trying to make himself invisible. He had dropped his briefcase and was sidling along the velvet-draped wall toward the service exit, keeping his head down, hoping the chaos focused on David would provide cover for his escape. He almost made it. He reached the door, his hand on the brass handle, looking back one last time with a terrified expression. But he had forgotten about Eleanor. She had not moved from her spot on the stage, but she had signaled. Two of her private security detail men, who looked like they were carved from granite, had anticipated the move. As Vance pushed the door open, he didn't find freedom. He found a wall of black suits blocking his path. "Going somewhere, counselor?" one of the guards asked. It wasn't really a question. Vance squeaked a literal high-pitched squeak as they grabbed him by the elbows and marched him back into the center of the room. "Officer," Eleanor called out, her voice cutting through the din like a knife. "I believe you will want to add Mr. Vance to your booking sheet. He is the notary on the forged will and the architect of the shell companies." Vance's knees gave out. He collapsed into a heap of expensive wool and cowardice, sobbing loudly. "I was just following orders. He made me do it. He threatened my license." "Save it for the judge," the officer said, pulling Vance up and cuffing him. The sight of his lawyer crumbling seemed to break the last reserve of David's resistance. He stopped fighting the officers who were dragging him toward the main doors. His body went slack, and his head swiveled toward me. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed, and filled with a desperate, pleading recognition. He looked at me, not as the enemy, but as his last lifeline. "James!" he screamed. "Dad, please." The officers paused for a second, to adjust their grip, giving him a moment to speak. "Dad, tell them," David begged, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and the blood from his nose. "I am sorry. Okay, I am sorry about the will. I am sorry about the test, but I did it for the family. I did it to keep us afloat. You cannot let them take me to prison. I will die in there, James. I am soft. I cannot survive that." He lunged forward, straining against the cuffs. "I am your son," he cried. "I am the only father Leo has ever known. Does that count for nothing? 20 years, James. We ate Sunday dinner together. I bought you that heating pad for your back. We are family." The room fell silent again, morbidly curious to see if the old man would crack. Would the bonds of 20 years be strong enough to save the monster? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat at my table, eaten my food, and smiled at me, while plotting to lock me in a dementia ward. I looked at the man who had tormented my dying daughter with threats of illegitimacy. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was an absolute freezing zero. The emotional connection I had once felt for him, the gratitude, the tolerance, the hope, had been severed so completely that it felt like looking at a stranger. No less than a stranger. A stranger deserves basic courtesy. David deserved nothing. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at him. "You are not my family," I said. My voice was low, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, every syllable was clear. But the years," David stammered. "Family protects," I said. "Family builds. You are a parasite." You attached yourself to us to feed. You drained Emily until she broke. You tried to drain Leo. And when you were done with them, you tried to consume me. I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto his. And as for being a father, I continued, you never were one. A father teaches his son how to be a man. All you taught Leo was how to be afraid. You are not his father, David. You are just a mistake we finally corrected. I straightened up and looked at the police captain. I have no son, I said firmly. Take him away. David let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. No, James, Leo, help me. Leo, still clinging to my side, buried his face in my jacket. He did not look up. He did not speak. He chose his side. The officers tightened their grip and began the long walk to the exit. As they dragged David through the ballroom, the press arrived. They must have been tipped off by Eleanor's people. A phalanx of photographers and cameramen burst through the doors, their flashbulbs exploding in a staccato rhythm of blinding white light. Pop, pop, pop. David tried to hide his face, but with his hands cuffed behind his back, he was exposed. The cameras captured every inch of his humiliation, the torn tuxedo, the bloody nose, the weeping eyes. It was the picture that would be on the front page of every newspaper in Chicago the next morning. The fallen Icarus dragged through the mud of his own making. The investors and guests did not step back this time. They leaned in. They jeered. Rot in hell, David! Thief! Scum! He was hauled out into the corridor, his screams fading as the heavy double doors swung shut behind him. Vance was dragged out right behind him, weeping silently. The room was left with a strange, vibrating energy. The villain was gone, but the wreckage remained. The investors looked around, realizing that while justice had been served, their money was likely gone forever. The murmurs of panic began to rise again. That was when Eleanor stepped forward. She tapped her cane on the floor 3 times. The sound was sharp, authoritative, and instantly commanding. The room quieted down, turning to the woman who actually held the power. Listen to me, Eleanor said. She did not yell. She didn't have to. The show is over. David Black is gone, and Apex Horizon is finished. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on the sharks who had been so eager to strip my assets just an hour ago. I know many of you have lost money tonight, she continued. That is the price of greed. That is the price of trusting a man who wears a mask. Consider it a tuition fee for a lesson in character. She walked over to where I was standing with Leo. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was worth more than any bank transfer. However, she said, her voice turning steely, I want to make one thing perfectly clear to everyone in this room. James Miller is under my protection. She looked directly at the property developers, who had been eyeing my shop like vultures. The building at 47 Oak Street stays with the Miller family. Any attempt to zone it, pressure it, or buy it through shell companies will be treated as a direct attack on the Vanderhoven Group. She paused, letting the weight of that threat sink in. And if I find that any of you, she swept her cane across the room, were complicit in David's schemes to defraud this man, or his grandson, my legal team will not just sue you. We will dismantle you, brick by brick. From this day forward, she declared, James Miller is a partner of Vanderhoven, and anyone who has a problem with him has a problem with me. The shift in the room was palpable. It was physical. Shoulders slumped. Aggressive postures softened. The sneers of disdain that I had faced all evening were replaced by looks of terrified respect. In the hierarchy of the Chicago food chain, Eleanor was the apex predator, and she had just adopted the stray. Understood, she asked. Yes, Madame Vanderhoven, a dozen voices murmured in unison. I looked at Eleanor. Her expression was stern, but her eyes were twinkling with a hint of mischief. She gave me a small wink. Then, I felt a squeeze on my arm. I looked down. Leo had pulled back from my chest. His face was red and wet with tears, but his eyes were clear. For the first time in his life, the shadow was gone. He looked at the empty doorway where David had vanished, and Then he looked at me. "He is gone, Grandpa," Leo whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "He is really gone." "He is gone, Leo," I confirmed. "And he is never coming back." Leo let out a breath that sounded like a sob, and then he hugged me again. It wasn't the desperate cling of a child this time. It was the embrace of a young man who had just been given his life back. I held him tight, feeling the thin frame of his shoulders shaking. We stood there, two survivors on a stage weeping in the relief of liberation. I looked down at the mahogany table. Lying there forgotten in the scuffle was the blue leather folder, the deed, the document that would have signed away my shop, my home, and my legacy. I gently disentangled myself from Leo. I walked over to the table. The room watched me. Nobody spoke. I picked up the document. The paper was heavy, expensive bond. It felt cold in my hands. I looked at the line where I was supposed to sign, James Miller. I thought about the hours I had spent at my bench. I thought about the ticking of the clocks. I thought about Emily's laugh before she got sick. I thought about the lie David had tried to write into history. I gripped the top of the page. Rip. The sound was loud, sharp, and violent. It echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. I tore it again, and again. I shredded the deed until it was nothing but a pile of blue and white confetti in my hands. Then I threw the pieces into the air. They fluttered down around me, landing on the expensive mahogany table, on the polished floor, on the tips of my shoes. "It is finished," I said. I looked out at the audience. The contempt I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, weary dignity. The people in the room, the millionaires, the socialites, the sharks, looked back at me. And then something happened. The hotel manager, Mr. Sterling, started it. He began to clap. Not a polite golf clap. A slow, rhythmic applause of genuine respect. Then Eleanor joined in. Then the police captain. And slowly, reluctantly, but inevitably, the rest of the room followed. The applause swelled, growing louder and louder until it filled the cavernous space. They weren't clapping for James Miller, the victim. They were clapping for James Miller, the watchmaker. The man who had faced down a serpent and won. The man who had fixed the broken mechanism of his family with nothing but patience, truth, and a very steady hand. I took Leo's hand. I nodded to Eleanor. "Let us go home, Leo," I said. "I have a tourbillon on my bench that needs attending to." "Yes, Grandpa," Leo smiled, wiping his eyes. "Let's go home." We walked down the stairs, not as artifacts or relics, but as the only two real things in a room full of fakes. It has been 3 months since the night the glass ceiling of my world shattered and then reformed into something stronger. The season has turned. The biting gray chill of the Chicago winter has finally retreated, replaced by the tentative warmth of early spring. The sunlight that streams through the front window of Kronos Restoration is no longer pale and weak. It is golden thick with dust motes, dancing in the air, illuminating a shop that looks very different from the tomb it used to be. The rot is gone. The peeling wallpaper that smelled of damp defeat has been stripped away, replaced by rich mahogany paneling that smells of beeswax and history. The flickering fluorescent tubes that gave everyone a corpse-like pallor are in the dumpster, swapped for warm, hanging pendant lights that cast a focused amber glow over the workbenches. The sign outside, which had been hanging by a rusted chain for a decade, has been restored. The gold leaf lettering of Kronos Restoration catches the eye of passers-by, now not with a shout, but with a confident gleam. This was not charity. Eleanor Vanderhoven made that very clear. When she sat down with me the week after the arrest, placing a check on my desk that made my breath catch, she had held up a hand before I could protest. "This is an investment, James," she had said, her voice sharp as a tack. "I expect a 15% return on equity within 5 years. You are the best horologist in the Midwest. Your problem was never the product, it was the marketing. And the depression." She was right, of course. She is always right. She bought a 49% stake in the business, leaving me the controlling interest. It was a partnership, not a handout. It allowed me to keep my dignity, which at 68 years old is worth more than the money itself. But the biggest change is not the paint or the lights. It is the noise. For 5 years, this shop was silent. It was just me and the ticking. Now there is music. Real music. Bach usually, or sometimes jazz, drifting from a high-quality speaker system, Leo installed in the corner. And there is laughter, and the sound of a second heartbeat joining the rhythm of the room. I looked across the shop. Leo sat at the apprentice bench I had set up next to mine. He was wearing a canvas apron that was slightly too big for him, smudged with oil and graphite. He was hunched over a movement, his posture mirroring my own, his eyes narrowed behind a visor magnifier. He is 18 years old, but in the last 12 weeks he seems to have aged 5 years in maturity and shed 10 years of weight from his soul. The terrified boy who flinched at loud noises is gone. In his place is a young man discovering that his hands have a purpose. "Grandpa," Leo said, not looking up. His voice was calm, focused. "I think the pallet fork is slightly misaligned on the entry stone. The lock is too deep." I smiled. I put down my own tools and walked over to look over his shoulder. "Let me see," I said. I peered through the microscope. He was working on a vintage Omega caliber. It was a sturdy workhorse of a movement unforgiving of errors. He was right. The ruby pallet stone was engaging with the escape wheel just a fraction of a millimeter too deeply. It would run, but the amplitude would be low. It would lose time. "You have a good eye, Leo," I said softly. "Most apprentices would not catch that for another 6 months. They would force it. They would oil it and hope for the best." "It felt wrong," Leo said, adjusting the banking pin with a microscopic turn of his screwdriver. It didn't breathe right." "Exactly," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It is mechanical sculpture, Leo. It is art. You are not just fixing a machine, you are restoring a heartbeat." He looked up at me, then pushing the visor up into his messy hair. He smiled. It was Emily's smile. The same curve of the lips, the same light in the eyes. For a long time, looking at him had been painful because I only saw the tragedy. Now I saw the future. We live together upstairs now. The apartment, once silent and dusty, is full of life again. Leo cooks, he is surprisingly good at it, and we eat dinner at the table every night talking about watches, about art, about history. We do not talk about David. We do not have to. The courts did the talking for us. The trial was swift. With the recording, the DNA evidence, and the forensic accounting report Eleanor's team provided, there was no wiggle room. David's house of cards didn't just fall, it incinerated. He pleaded guilty to avoid a public spectacle that would have humiliated him further. But the judge, a woman who evidently did not take kindly to men who defraud their families, showed no leniency. 20 years. That was the sentence. 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. He will be an old man when he gets out. He will be older than I am now. The day the sentence was read, Leo and I were in the courtroom. When the gavel came down, David didn't look at us. He stared at the table, hollowed out, stripped of his suits and his lies. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt the heavy, satisfying clunk of a problem being solved. Like a gear finally clicking into place. All the assets came back to us. The house in the suburbs, the one I hated, we sold immediately. The proceeds went into a real trust for Leo, one that I oversee, but that he will control when he is 25. The money David had stolen from the Sterling Trust was largely gone, spent on maintaining his illusion of wealth. But what remained was enough. Enough to keep the shop running. Enough to send Leo to art school part-time while he apprentices with me. We are not rich, but we are whole. The bell above the door chimed a bright, cheerful sound. "James, are you decent?" I chuckled. "Come in, Eleanor. The kettle is already on." Eleanor Vanderhoven walked in. She was not wearing a ball gown today, nor was she wearing rags. She wore a smart tweed blazer and jeans, looking like a retired professor rather than a real estate tycoon. She carried a box of pastries from the bakery down the street. Brioche, she announced, placing the box on the counter. Because I know you skip lunch when you are working on a balance spring. You are a tyrant, I teased, taking the box. I am a managing partner, she corrected, winking at Leo. Hello, Leo. How is the Omega coming along? Almost there, Madame Eleanor, Leo said respectfully. He adored her. To him, she was a mixture of a fairy godmother and a general. We sat in the small seating area I had set up near the window, 2 comfortable leather armchairs and a low table. I poured the tea, Earl Grey steaming hot. We watched the street outside. People walked by busy, with their lives checking their phones, rushing to meetings. They had no idea that inside this shop, 3 people who had been discarded by the world were sitting together, drinking tea and winning. I heard from the prison board, Eleanor said quietly, sipping her tea. He has been assigned to the laundry detail. Minimum wage, 12 cents an hour. I nodded. It is honest work, for the first time in his life. He sent a letter, Eleanor added, to his lawyer. He wants to appeal based on ineffective counsel. Let him, I said, breaking a piece of brioche. He can appeal to the moon. The ink on that birth certificate is dry and the DNA does not change. He is fighting gravity. We sat in silence for a moment. It was a comfortable silence, the kind you can only share with someone who has seen your scars and showed you theirs. Eleanor and I had become unlikely confidants. We were both widows, both fighters, both people who appreciated the value of old things. You look good, James, she said, studying my face. You look lighter. I feel lighter, I admitted. For 5 years I was carrying a stone. I thought I was protecting Emily's memory by tolerating him. I thought I was protecting Leo by keeping the peace. I didn't realize the stone was crushing us. I looked over at Leo. He was humming to himself as he oiled a jewel. I taught him something today, I told Eleanor, about the escapement. Oh, I told him that the escapement is the conscience of the watch, I said. It controls the power. It releases it in precise, honest increments. Tick, tock, truth, truth. If one tooth on the escape wheel is bent just one tiny microscopic bend, the whole watch fails. It might run for a while, but it will skip. It will lie about the time and eventually it will stop. Eleanor nodded her eyes sharp. Like a lie in a marriage, or a lie on a legal document. Exactly, I said. David was a bent tooth. He disrupted the whole universe of this family. A small lie I am the father grew into a cancer that consumed everything. Now that the part is replaced, I gestured to Leo. The mechanism is running true again. Eleanor smiled, reaching out to pat my hand. You are a philosopher, James Miller. I am just a watchmaker, I said. After Eleanor left, the afternoon sun began to dip lower, painting the shop in shades of deep orange and purple. Leo finished the Omega. He placed it on the timing machine. Tick, tick, tick. The line on the screen was flat and straight. Perfect amplitude. Perfect beat error. It is running perfectly, Grandpa, Leo said, pride beaming from his face. Good job, Leo, I said. Clean up your bench. Let us go get some dinner. I am craving Italian. The place behind the alley, Leo asked, grinning. Where you met Eleanor? The very same, I laughed. Though I think we will go through the front door this time. Leo went upstairs to wash up. I stayed in the shop for a moment longer. I walked over to my desk. In the corner, next to my loop and my tweezers, sat a framed photograph. It was the one I had looked at 1,000 times in despair. Martha and Emily, standing on the porch of our old house, laughing. For years, looking at it had hurt. It had been a reminder of what I had lost. Now I picked it up. I ran my thumb over the glass. You were right, Sarah, I whispered to the empty room. I am sorry it took me 18 years to listen. I am sorry I laughed at you at the baby shower. I was arrogant. I thought I knew men. I thought I knew safety. I looked at Emily's face in the photo. She looked so young, so hopeful. I saved him, Em, I said softly. I saved your boy. He is safe now. He is an artist, and he is a miller, through and through. I felt a presence in the room. Not a ghost, nothing spooky. Just a warmth, a sense of approval. The feeling you get when a difficult job is finally finished, and the tool is placed back in the drawer. I put the photo back down. I looked around the shop one last time. The rows of clocks on the wall were ticking in unison. 100 different pendulums, 100 different heartbeats, all moving together in a symphony of order. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It is a sound that used to remind me of my mortality, of time running out. Now it sounds like a heartbeat, strong, steady, enduring. I am James Miller. I am 68 years old. I have lost my wife. I have lost my daughter. I have been betrayed, scammed, and humiliated. But I am still here. My shop is open. My grandson is singing upstairs. My conscience is clear. I turned off the main lights, leaving just the soft glow of the security lamp. Peace. It is not the peace of the grave, nor the peace of surrender. It is the hard-won peace of the soldier who has returned from the war, hung up his sword, and picked up his tools again. I locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and walked toward the stairs. The mechanism is fixed. The time is right. And for the first time in a long time, I am looking forward to tomorrow. I am sitting on the front porch of the house that I now officially own. The sun is setting over Chicago, casting long bruised shadows of purple and burnt orange across the street. In my hand, I hold a glass of iced tea, the condensation cold against my palm. In my pocket, the silver watch ticks against my ribs. A steady, rhythmic beat. Tick, tock, tick, tock. For 68 years I have listened to that sound. I have spent my entire existence hunched over a workbench magnifying glass, screwed into my eye, fixing things that other people broke. I have replaced mainsprings that snapped under tension. I have polished gears that were corroded by neglect. I have taken chaos and turned it back into order 1 millimeter at a time. But as I sit here tonight watching the day bleed into night, I realize the irony of my life. While I was busy fixing tiny mechanisms, I almost let the machinery of my own existence be dismantled by a man with a smile and a fountain pen. I want to talk to you. Yes, you, the person listening to this voice. You might be driving your car right now. You might be folding laundry. You might be lying in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why you feel a knot of anxiety in your stomach every time your spouse walks into the room. I need you to listen to me not as a storyteller, but as a survivor. Because what happened to me, the fraud, the betrayal, the near total destruction of my legacy, did not happen because I was stupid. It did not happen because I was weak. It happened because I was nice. We are taught from childhood that to be good people, we must be selfless. We are taught to share. We are taught to trust our family. We are taught that to suspect a loved one of treachery is a sin. I am here to tell you that is a lie. I nearly lost everything because I believed that protecting myself was an act of selfishness. I thought that asking to read the fine print was an insult to David. I thought that demanding a DNA test was a betrayal of Emily's memory. I thought that keeping my assets in my own name was a lack of faith in the future. I was wrong. Self-preservation is not selfishness. It is the highest form of responsibility. Think about it. If I had signed those papers on Friday night, what would have happened? I would be in a memory care unit medicated into oblivion, rotting away in a room that smelled of urine and bleach. And Leo, my grandson. He would be on the street or, worse, trapped under David's thumb, forced to live a lie to survive. By protecting myself, by refusing to sign, by wearing a wire, by digging for the truth, I did not just save my own skin. I saved Leo. I saved the memory of my daughter. I saved the legacy of my ancestors. You cannot protect the people you love if you are standing on a foundation that is crumbling. You cannot pull someone out of a burning building if you are already on fire. So this is my warning to you. Beware of the Davids. They do not always look like villains. They do not twist their mustaches or laugh maniacally in the dark. They look like the golden boy. They look like the perfect daughter-in-law. They look like the charming business partner who promises to double your investment. They use your own virtues against you. They use your love as a weapon. They weaponize your guilt. "Don't you trust me?" they ask, with a hurt look in their eyes. "After all I have done for you." "We are family," they say. Family helps each other. When you hear those words used to pressure you into signing a document, to force you to lend money you cannot afford to lose, or to make you give up control of your life, run. Those words are not appeals to love. They are the sound of a trap snapping shut. Family does not demand you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Family does not ask you to sign your name on a blank check. Family does not hide the truth in a blue folder and scream at you when you ask to read it. I learned this lesson 18 years too late. I remember Sarah. I remember the baby shower. I remember the laughter. God, I hate that laughter now. It rings in my ears like a funeral bell. She stood there, a woman of science and intuition, and she told me the truth. She told me to look at the ink, not the smile. Don't let him sign the birth certificate. It was a simple instruction. If I had listened, if I had stopped for 1 second and valued my intuition over my politeness, David would have been exposed 2 decades ago. Emily might still be alive, free from the stress that ate her alive. Leo would have grown up knowing the truth. But I laughed. I chose the comfort of denial over the discomfort of confrontation. Do not make my mistake. If you have a voice in your head telling you something is wrong, listen to it. That voice is not paranoia. That voice is millions of years of survival instinct trying to keep you alive. If your best friend tells you that your partner looks at you with cold eyes, listen. If your gut tells you that the business opportunity sounds too good to be true, it is. If you feel a chill when someone hands you a pen, drop it. Documents do not lie. Numbers do not lie. DNA does not lie. Only people lie. I look down at my hands. They are old hands. The skin is spotted with age, the knuckles are swollen with arthritis. But they are strong. They are the hands of a man who reclaimed his life. I am James Miller. I am a master watchmaker. I have spent my life regulating the time of others, making sure their seconds ticked by in perfect order. But in the end, the most important time I ever fixed was my own. I repaired the mechanism of my family. I removed the rusted broken gear that was David Black, and I replaced it with the truth. And now the clock runs true. So I have a question for you. Who is holding the pen in your life? Is there someone standing over your shoulder right now, metaphorically or literally, pressuring you to sign away your power? Is there someone making you feel guilty for saying no? Is there someone who tells you that you are confused or crazy when you question them? If there is, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think of the sound of that paper tearing, the sound of the deed to my house ripping in half in that ballroom. It was the best sound I have ever heard. Better than any symphony. Better than the ticking of a Patek Philippe. It was the sound of freedom. You have the power to tear the paper. You have the power to put the pen down. You have the power to say, I am not signing. I am not agreeing. I am not going quietly. It will be hard. They will scream. They will cry. They will call you selfish. They will try to destroy you. Let them try. Because the alternative is to let them sign your name to your own destruction. And trust me, looking back from the porch at 68 years old, nothing haunts you more than the battles you were too polite to fight. My name is James Miller. I saved my grandson. I saved my shop. And I saved myself. Now it is your turn. Be the watchmaker of your own life. Open the case back. Look at the gears. Find the rot. And cut it out. Because time is the one thing you can never get a refund on. Do not let a thief spend it for you. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to tell, but if my scars can serve as a map for just one of you to find your way out of a trap, then every second of this nightmare was worth it. I want to know who I am talking to tonight. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Are you safe? Are you free, or are you looking for the courage to tear up your own contract? Let's talk. We can be a community of survivors here. If you enjoyed this story, or if it made you look at your own life a little differently, please support the channel. Subscribe to Bittersweet Revenge. Hit that like button to help us beat the algorithm. And if you really want to help this story reach someone who needs it, press that hype button. Let's make sure the truth gets heard. I'm James Miller. Keep your eyes open and keep your pen in your pocket. God bless.